All right, everyone. Welcome to the official, unofficial Grace Point podcast. Good to have you guys back. I'm Steven.
I'm Isaiah.
And we are your co-hosts. So we are, we realized we jumped into this podcast. I mean, we don't know what we're doing, clearly.
No.
Yeah. And,
no idea.
Getting a lot of great tips and stuff like that. But we realized that we kind of jumped into this whole thing talking about how we're a weird church. And that makes sense if you've been to our church or you've been to our church a long time, stuff like that. But actually, if you don't really know our church, you're just getting kind of, wow, this is a weird church.
Yeah, you only saw the weird aspects of us. So yeah, my brother was like, I think you made us seem weirder than we actually are, which was not our intention. But looking back, I can see how that's the case.
It's not a good first impression.
Yeah, so we felt like, okay, let's just go back a little bit, backtrack, zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
What the heck is this thing called Grace Point?
Yeah.
Who are we?
Yeah.
And what makes us tick, I think, was what we wanted to focus on this week.
Last episode was what makes us weird. This episode is what makes us tick. You know, what are we passionate about? And I think if there's one slogan that really captures it, it's an Ep.2 church in every college town. Yeah. I mean, that motto, slogan, whatever it is, that tagline is what's sort of animated us the last 10 years. And
yeah, if you come to our building, it's posted on the walls,
website,
it's everywhere.
Everything. Watch a video. Isaiah yells it at you in his narrations and spoken words.
Yeah, I don't do that because I want to.
It really, it's very stirring though. I'm very thankful you do it.
Thank you, Steven.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anyway, moving on.
So we're just gonna unpack that slogan and just kind of talk about like each part of it or aspects of it that really kind of explain and capture who we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Acts 2, maybe we could go backwards, like Acts 2 church in every college town. Okay, so college. And usually when you think of college ministries, reaching college students, you think about parachurch ministries like InterVarsity, Crew, Navigators, like all great ministries. You don't really think about a church though. So how did that happen? How did we end up, was it like a grand strategy, college, that's how it was for those parachurch organizations, Not quite like that for us.
Yeah, so I can take this this section of it because I was here for a while. So I think most of the people, even people who are like kind of staff, a lot of them don't fully know the history of our church. So it might be helpful to just tell it. Let's just tell the story.
Yeah, and I've heard it like a billion times, and I still ask you like,
yeah, like, wait, what was this part again? Yeah. So, just to be upfront, this is our history. So the story begins in 1981 when a Korean couple, their names were Becky and Paul, they started a church called Birkeland. And it was called Birkeland because it was on the border of Berkeley and Oakland. So hence the name Birkeland, Birkeland Baptist Church, so BBC. So you hear that phrase sometimes. And they started a church on the Berkeley campus for college students. And that was always their vision. They came out of another group that was also about college ministry. Wow. And so, they founded. So the founders were not Pastor Ed and Kelly, contrary.
Yeah, that surprised me when I first heard it. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Contrary to common belief, my parents actually didn't come to our church, I think, until like 1986, 87.
Your dad knew like people, but then he didn't even go there as an undergrad.
Yeah, so back in the day, the Korean Christian community at Berkeley was pretty small. So they were all kind of friends. So like his best friend was part of Birkeland, as well as like his best friend's younger brother, who he was also very close to, and a bunch of others. But my dad, for just various reasons, started coming to Birkeland after graduation, and him and those other friends and the leader couple were kind of the first generation of leaders of that church. A lot of them became pastors. A lot of them are still pastors to this day at other Birkeland churches, BBC churches. But around 2006, the whole BBC, which by that time was kind of a network of churches, kind of similar to what Grace Point is today, decided to split, go autonomous, so that it wouldn't be a network anymore. And so our church became Grace Point, what it is today, incorporated as a new organization. And that became kind of, I don't know, in some ways that's the start, I guess, of our like modern history as Grace Point. So that was when I was in high school.
Right. Yeah, and I came in, I didn't know any of this as a freshman, right?
When did you find out about it? I'm just curious. When and how? Do you remember?
Gosh, I think it was like my freshman year, and like there was this Q&A session, which we do all the time, and your dad started talking about like our history, and it started talking about some of the online criticism and stuff, and I was like, oh, what the, and I went on like I've said in other episodes, I went on saw all this online stuff, and I was like, whoa, this is not my experience. Whatever. And then I just...
Oh, so that's how you have heard about the whole BBC history?
Yeah, a little bit. And then I heard a fuller history from, your parents and stuff like that, and from you as well. But like, I think what I was intrigued by when I heard it was how, like, and this is maybe the other aspect of the motto, which is like Acts 2 church and college. Like, how does that fit together? Like, when I think I have to say, when I came, I was like, wow, this is brilliant. Like, I was really impressed by just the faithfulness of everyone, the culture, everything. And I was like, how did you guys like set out to do this? Like, how did you? And the answer was like, we didn't set out to do this. It all happened by accident, you know? And that was, to me, that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
And it seemed like even before I was there, during those days, that kind of, because it was a college context and you're with each other all the time. And college is that great flattening of just like social structures where like people, it doesn't matter what background you're from and stuff like that. You're just living in the same dorm room and you're just close, right? And then you see each other. And then, so there was that. And then kind of, come to the homogeneity, maybe a little bit of just being Korean and Asian, whatever.
That helped, I'm sure.
It was close. It was just really close. And I remember hearing, like, first thing came to our church, like, I've known this guy for 25 years. I was like, I've never heard of that at a church. And so that stuck with me. I was kind of in a place where what God was talking to me about at the time was about covenantal relationships, actually, because I kind of noticed that I wasn't like that. Just my friends were like going to high school, they're all crying. And I was like, why, you guys didn't know this was going to happen? Like, I was kind of cold.
Going
like
to college
that.
from
Yeah,
high
so
school.
I just noted that even my non-Christian friends knew something about relationships that I didn't. And I needed to learn that. And then I stumbled across Grace Point. It's like, we've known each other for 25 years. I was like, well, okay, I think there's something here, right? So that what I've heard is like, you're just living like you lived in college. You didn't really graduate. You still went over each other's houses and all that.
So it in some ways it was kind of intentional in the sense that there was kind of a turning point around, I think around like the late 80s, where kind of some of like the younger staff, as well as like some of like the seniors and stuff, started talking to each other actually and saying stuff like, you know what, like what we've got here, you know. And I mean, college is a special time where it just lends itself to the pattern of Acts 2. Where you're seeing each other every day, like kind of whether you like it or not, you're stuck within these like dorms and you're seeing each other and, you know, you don't have much possession. So like money, and there's no like difference in social status. So just in some ways, it's like, if there's any place where it's easy to experience and actually live out Acts 2, it's going to be in college. Yeah. And people had been experiencing that as undergrads. And there kind of came a point where people started talking to each other and saying, you know what, like, this doesn't have to end. Like, we can actually stick around. So it wasn't just like people started sticking around, like looking at each other. Like, they actually started talking about it.
Right, because the Bay Area was not like the place to be.
Back
it
then,
was like
it's
orchards.
Different now.
Silicon Valley was like an actual valley.
There was no Silicon Valley. SF was not yet like a tech hub. All the jobs were like in SoCal and other places. So it was kind of a radical thought that like, you know, we can choose to stay and to invest in this church and each other and build something really special here. And so, you know, you hear about like Peter Choi, the guy who coined this term Acts 2 Church in every college town, who coined that slogan. You know, he took like a job at like a computer parts minimum wage
Berkeley
job.
Grad.
Yeah, Berkeley grad working
crazy.
a minimum wage job just so he could stick around. You know, other stories like that. And people started to kind of one by one make that decision to stick around. So lest you think that was something orchestrated by my parents, it actually wasn't. Like, those sort of conversations started to happen actually like right around when my parents started coming to our church in the late 80s, and they weren't yet like the pastor figure. So again, it wasn't like it's tempting to think of it as some like grandmaster scheme. It really wasn't. Actually, it was kind of just happened. It was a grassroots sort of thing. And then over time that picked up momentum. And I mean, even I think when we were in college, like, we were kind of at the beginning edge of like this phenomenon where like majority of the class was like sticking around now, because even like in the 10 15 20 years prior, like, people would stick around, but it was like, you know, it was like a handful. It was maybe like 4 or 5 out of a class of like 20 or 30. So it definitely evolved over time.
So kind of what I'm hearing you say is it's like people are close, living out Christian life together in college context, experiencing Acts 2. Maybe they didn't even know it, but they, you know, but to some degree it was like, there's something special here. And there's one inflection point, which is where people are going like, hey, we don't have, this doesn't have to stop. So then they're staying. And so there's that kind of family feel. But then when we were in undergrad, there was kind of another inflection point.
Yeah, it was kind of a jump.
Where it was like, suddenly this, like, the whole idea of every college town, this church planting on college campuses kind of took off, right? And I remember our sophomore year, 2010, having 2009, the Thanksgiving retreat, where like our Austin peers came up, right? It was kind of the first group of students for the Austin church plant, and they sang, "Thank you for giving to the Lord." and there was like not a dry eye in the auditorium. And like for me, it was just, as a sophomore, I was just like, cool. Like it was great. But I didn't know how much that meant to like the older leaders and stuff who had sent off that first team. We can talk a little bit about that.
So to backtrack a little bit, right? 2006, we became independent. We became Grace Point, and that wasn't like a, hey, let's all go independent, guys. It was a tough time, right? I don't want to go into all the lurid details, right? But like it meant some lost relationships. Like personally, all my best friends who I grew up with were on the other side of that split.
Yeah.
And kind of overnight, I lost my reference group in a way. I mean, they were my only reference group, but I was a junior in high school, and they were like definitely my best friends. And kind of in a similar way, we as a church were feeling just, kind of, I don't know if rudderless is the right term, but definitely like, well, we're kind of alone in the world now. And to plant our first church as Grace Point in 2008, it felt soon like, well, we just became independent. We're really going to do this. It felt vulnerable. Like, what if something like this happens again in the future? And, another split happens. Like, what about that? And there was just a lot of fears around it. And so it was almost like, planning. I've said this before, planning a church in 2008 kind of felt like it would kill us. Like we thought we were going to die. I mean, looking back, it was a little melodramatic. I mean, because it's not like they were going to like, I don't know, Antarctica. They're going to Austin.
Texas,
they were in the States. I mean, Texas is different, but it's not that different. But anyway, so that church plant happened, and then what you were describing, that first year when they came back, and those guys were actually our peers. So it's neat.
Shout out to Andrew,
like Francis, David G. Lou, James, all those dudes. All you guys, so I mean, because of that church plant, those guys are here, and we have the relationships we do, and so because of that sort of emboldened our church, I think. And then 2010, and in some ways I think 2010 affected you a lot more than it affected me.
Well, I mean, just to comment on what you were just talking about, like, I love that it was really out of a place of weakness, and what I think what I've learned a lot, because I came from a charismatic Vineyard church, and even reading like the Vineyard story kind of gave me a understanding that God works through weakness, right? Anyway, that's just one of the things I love about this story. But in 2010, then we planted like, 3. It was like
3 in a year.
3.
Yeah, we got bold all of a sudden.
SD, Riverside, and Minnesota.
Yeah. And
I remember that winter retreat where they were announcing who was going to be on those teams. And I remember I had my 3 mentors, and it was like, SD is, Richard Lung. And I was like, oh, that's one of my mentors. And Riverside, Abe Yang. Oh, that's another one of my mentors. And Minnesota, John Lee. All 3 of my leaders are gone. Like, me and my friends looked at each other, we're like, who's leading us next year? Like, what's happening? And it was just like, Wu left. And Wu was like, So that was, I mean, we never did it that way again, because that was a little traumatic.
It was.
But at the same time, that was actually, for me, when I started picking up on this vision. Because I'm from SoCal, and so I would go back for breaks, and I would go on these domestic mission trips where I'd go to Riverside, and like Bob was there, our friend, and our good friend Bob, and he would pick me up for service and stuff. But then we would go on these like week long, where welcome week, as people are coming back to school, we're just doing outreach and stuff. And I just remember those mission trips being so magical, because it was like, you go out the day, you're a missionary for a week. You go out for the day, all day you're doing outreach and meeting people, you're talking to them about God, you're just trying to play ball and just get to know them and stuff. You're throwing on events and all that kind of thing. You come back, you just tell each other how God was working that day. You celebrate that. You eat good food, unhealthy food, college food, and did it again and again and again each day. Went to other campuses like LA and Irvine, like prayed over there, prayed God would bring a church there. And we're just thinking like, I can do this for the rest of my life. I want to do this for the rest of my life with these people and with this mission, and it was exciting, and it took off. And so we have like all these videos, and we'll link some in the description, of just like the growth of our church and all that. And it's kind of been crazy, like to because we're on 70 plus campuses now, nationwide network. And yes, all the older ones, they're like, we didn't plan for this.
No.
We didn't know it was.
No way.
Yeah. And then even just like when I tell people about the latest round of church planting, 2021, 1,000 people signed up after COVID to go on a church plant. These are our bivocational, members. And then we sent out 300 plus to Midwest and Northeast.
400.
400. Yeah, I think so. And at Philly, which, the 30 of us in Philly is just part of that wave. So then people ask us like, how, right? And so I guess my question is like, okay, if you were to say what are the key ingredients to that.
Like what enables us to do that?
Yeah. And we might be repeating some of the stuff we've already said, but what would be the key ingredients to like what we look like today?
Yeah. So I think, man, there's a lot that goes into that, but I think one thing that I often say, and that you'll hear different leaders around here saying, is that like our secret sauce, like okay, when you look at any one of us, we are not very remarkable people. We're not especially smart. I think we're probably like we're better at CS than most churches probably. Like that's something, but it's not like we're super charismatic. Like our preachers are not like amazing. We often say we have like a lot of leaders with no leadership. Like we're just very ordinary folk.
Yeah.
And like I don't think we're composed of these heroes of faith. And yet when we go to conferences and other pastors like hear these numbers of how many churches we planted and stuff, they're kind of dumbfounded. And when we thought about it, like when I think about it, I think the secret sauce of it goes back to that very beginning of that experience of doing life together and deciding to continue that pattern of life that you had as a college student into your post-grad years and not stopping that. So that there's this closeness that really and closeness, community begets courage. When you have people who are doing it with you, when you have people that you can trust, that you are covenanted with, then it makes you bold and makes you able to do things that you would never be able to do on your own. And we always use this example when talking about this, but like if you're on a lonely mountain road and your car breaks down, you're by yourself, right? That's a horror movie.
It's over.
Or like a disaster, right? That's something terrible, right? But when that happens with a car full of friends, right?
Then you just have to outrun the other guy. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. Is that how you think of that? No. Okay. Remind me never to get stuck with you. No, but if it happens with a car full of friends, it's an adventure, and it's a fun story to tell later. It is. And all those things, right? And I think that's kind of our experience of church planting. It's like, if we do it together, there's not much we can't do.
Yeah. So what is it that your dad's like, what looks like high commitment is just covenant or
is actually
closeness?
I wish I had a better memory.
Dude, I forgot.
Yeah. Well, I think what looks like high commitment is actually just community.
Yeah. And then the other phrase we always say is, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go together.
Go together.
And so, coming at that for that, like the whole closeness aspect, I didn't really appreciate that. I don't think I would have wanted to go fast because I was a church kid. I wanted to serve. I wanted to, and I feel like God, personally, my story was like, slow down. You got to learn to build relationships because that's going to be the strength for like a lifelong, serving and following God. Yeah. And that's like so true.
So I think people might not know this, but actually back in the day, our church was not very evangelistic. We were there was the seeker friendly movement. We like to say that we were seeker hostile back then, and we talked about that.
We're going to talk about that.
With Pastor Will and kind of some of the truly cringe things that we did as a church back then. But in some ways, I think because we had that period where we just got close and we were like not effective at evangelism. I think we tried here and there, but and a lot of that we learned from Saddleback and other groups later on. But there was that whole period where we did like nothing but just fellowship and like get really close, I think. And I think in some ways, like to this day, we're kind of powered by that period.
Still
when I look back, like the relationships among like the deacons and the older ones were forged kind of during that time. And I think one thing that we've been feeling in recent years is now that's starting to run out a little bit. And so, in some ways we have to slow down, go back to our roots, make sure that we don't neglect our relationships with one another as we try to go fast. And
you don't want to outpace kind of that ministry. Like you don't want that to outpace what's happening internally.
Exactly.
Right? Both in our relationships and our relationship with God and all that. So yeah. One key ingredient I also thought was just everybody a minister. We say that a lot. Like, church planting is hard. It's hard on a lot of fronts. And it's hard, even just from the financial aspect, right? But so many people in our church are bivocational, like co-vocational. They have full-time jobs and stuff. I worked 3 years in affordable housing, doing that while doing college ministry. You did how many years of... You did your law school.
I did a video. I did random things.
Yeah. And then my wife, like 7 years in just tech company, while doing ministry. There's something about that, like where like people worked really hard. They knew how to sacrifice, for the work of the gospel. And then in terms of like church planting and being able to fund that, like and do that, I think Bivo accelerated some of the church planting. I think so. That would be another ingredient.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. And then just kind of going off of that, like the whole everyone a minister thing. I think that's also what enables us to do what we do because, I don't have to be like the most amazing leader in the world. And I look at a lot of other church planters that I meet now, and like hats off to them. A lot of them, it's kind of a one-man show.
Yeah, really
you know,
entrepreneurial.
Yeah, and
like,
by the
really
force
innovative.
of their like will and personality and talent, they're able to hold a church together. I don't think I could do that on my own, but I have like a lot of very committed team members, you know, and so I know that we can do this together, and they're there to kind of fill in my failures and my foibles, and that really helps, I think.
Yeah. So you touched on this a little earlier, just kind of like, like where we're at now as a church and going into the future, right? So we talked a little about what makes us tick, and the things that form kind of who we are now, that led up to what we look like now, and trying to make sense of that. Where do you see us going in the future? Maybe we could just end this podcast a little, like maybe next 5-10 years, you know?
Yeah.
What is gonna continue, you know, or what will that look like? Maybe?
Yeah. I mean, so I've been thinking about that a lot, and we've been talking about that. I think
because your parents they're about to,
yeah.
They
said today they're retiring in 5 years. I don't know if that's true or they were just in that kind of mood today, but that's what they said. But maybe I shouldn't have said that. Oh shoot. But the whole thing about like, where is our church gonna be? I mean, I think we're never gonna abandon Acts 2 Church in every college town. Like I think that's where we started. We're gonna be faithful to that, unless God gives us a clear sign to get out of that. But I think what's been really interesting in the past year, but maybe past 5 years or so, is kind of this, what we've been calling like the pivot to youth ministry. I feel like God has kind of expanded our vision, and I think we need a whole new episode to like go into this in depth.
This requires a whole new episode.
But I just in brief, I think there's been a lot of signs that have been pointing us towards youth ministry, whether it be just all these big churches. We did kind of our own research and found that the top 25 biggest churches in America, more than half of them don't have a high school group, you know. We've been finding out that there's just all these churches, especially after COVID, where the youth groups have just been decimated, and a lot of just youth leaders quitting because it's so hard these days.
You can't find youth pastors.
You can't find youth pastors anymore. And so we've been just feeling like, man, we need to expand and not just think of ourselves as just a college-focused church. So for me, I see it as we're keeping the college ministry thing. We're not.
In some ways, we're even like, like for college students to become youth mentors, and disciple them that way.
Yeah, because I feel like college students are like the best people.
Yeah, it was college students who led my middle school youth group and led me to Christ, and in many ways, who I am today is because of that. Because of them, it was such a formative period. So I love the pivot. I think it makes sense, and I mean, I don't. Personally, I'm not like a youth ministry, like I'm not that charismatic youth pastor ministry, like whatever thing, but like, like you said, like because we're doing it together, we can, right?
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that's in the future. I don't know. Do you think we're gonna keep Grace Point, the name? Like
I don't know, man. I kind of think
when we planted Philly, we wanted to story church.
I kind of think we got to let go of the name But I mean, that's my 2 cents, that we should all just.
It's tough though.
It is tough. I don't want to prognosticate too much on that, but
yeah.
What do you see? 5-10 years. What do you think?
Oh man, I think I don't know. I would like to dream big. We're already international, and we got our church in Hsinchu, Taiwan, but I think we will go more places international. That's one thing, but
actually, that's something I've been thinking about too.
Oh yeah,
a lot about kind of that being the next phase. But anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you would like to go somewhere. Where would you want to go? I don't know. Maybe we have to talk to our wives.
This is gonna seem super random, but Belgium.
Oh.
We met this one.
Yeah.
I won't name him here. But we met this one law student from Belgium this past year, and he kept telling us, non-Christian guy, but he kept telling us, you know what? There's nothing like what you guys are doing here in my home country.
Yeah.
And Christianity is hated here, but if there was a group like yours, like I would come. And he actually became Christian this past summer. Praise the Lord. That's a whole story in and of itself. But I don't know. That would
be neat.
Yeah, he's like, if you ever come to Europe, come to my country. Yeah. And ever since then, that's kind of haunted me. I've been feeling like, oh man.
But I love that, because it's like, it's not because we have a great vision for Belgium. It's that connection we have through that guy now.
Yeah.
Right. And I love the way that works. So we'll see how God works and moves. But I'm excited, and just God willing, we'll be able to just continue.
Amen.
All right. So that's a little bit of an overview. Hopefully you got a better idea of our group and what we're about. And so we'll see you next episode. Hit like. And I was told to say smash the subscribe button.
Dude, you can't say that. You're too old. You can only say that if you're young.
Really weird to me.
That sounded super awkward.
Just click it. Just click it.
Click. All right. Thanks for joining us on the official, unofficial Grace Point podcast.